Life is not something to be controlled, micromanaged, or forced into a rigid structure. It is meant to be experienced, felt, and allowed to flow naturally. Alan Watts, a philosopher who masterfully blended Eastern and Western thought, often spoke about the importance of flowing with life rather than resisting it. He believed that many of our struggles come from trying to impose our own will on reality, instead of aligning ourselves with the natural rhythm of existence. When we stop trying to control everything, when we stop resisting the present moment, life becomes lighter, easier, and more fulfilling. One of Alan Watts's most famous quotes that captures this idea is, "You're under no obligation to be the same person you were 5 minutes ago." This simple yet profound statement speaks to the fluidity of life and identity. Many people spend their lives trapped by their past mistakes, regrets, or outdated self-conceptions. They believe they must stay consistent with who they have been, even when that version of themselves no longer serves them. But Watts reminds us that we are constantly changing, growing, and evolving. The idea of clinging to an old identity is one of the greatest barriers to personal growth. Many people feel obligated to stay the same because they fear judgment from others. They worry that if they change their opinions, lifestyle, or beliefs, they will be seen as inconsistent or unreliable. But Watts teaches that life itself is change. The river is never the same at two different points. Just like a person is never exactly the same from one moment to the next, residing in the past is merely pointless pain. By embracing change, we allow ourselves the freedom to evolve. Imagine if a caterpillar resisted becoming a butterfly simply because it was comfortable being a caterpillar. It would never experience the beauty and potential of its wings. Likewise, when we refuse to change, when we force ourselves to conform to an outdated version of who we were, we prevent ourselves from experiencing new possibilities. Another powerful quote by Watts that expands on this idea is, "The only way to make sense out of change is to plunge into it, move with it, and join the dance." Most people fear change because they view it as a loss of control. They want stability, predictability, and certainty. But Watts reminds us that life is change. To resist change is to resist life itself. Instead of fearing the unknown, we must embrace it, like a dancer moving to the rhythm of the music. Just think about the sea. The waves always keep moving, always morphing, always unpredictable. When you swim against a current, you only get tired and have a fight. But if you float and let the waves take you, then you tend to move effortlessly with the flow of nature in the sea. Life is just the same. When we fight change, we invite suffering, but when we accept it, mold, and go with the flow, life becomes much easier. People often get stuck because they fear letting go of what is familiar, even if it no longer serves them. They stay in jobs they hate, relationships that drain them, or mindsets that limit them, simply because these things feel safe. But Watts encourages us to trust the process. Life is a dance, not a rigid march. The more we surrender to the rhythm of change, the more joy and peace we experience. Another key aspect of embracing the flow of life is learning to trust the present moment. Watts famously said, "No valid plans for the future can be made by those who have no capacity for living now." Many people spend their entire lives planning for a future that never arrives. They are always waiting for the right time to be happy. They tell themselves that once they get the perfect job, the perfect partner, the perfect body, or the perfect amount of money, then they will truly live. But Watts warns us against this illusion. The future is always uncertain, and the only moment we truly have is now. Think about how much time people waste worrying about the future. They stress over things that haven't happened yet. They obsess over problems that might never occur, and they create mental stories about how things should be. But in doing so, they miss the richness of the present. Right now is the only reality. The past is a memory, and the future is just an idea. When we stop worrying about what's next, we begin to truly experience life as it unfolds. This idea is closely tied to another one of Watt's powerful insights. Muddy water is best cleared by leaving it alone. Many people try to solve every problem immediately. They overthink, overanalyze, and try to force solutions. But sometimes, the best thing we can do is step back and allow things to settle on their own. Just as stirring up muddy water makes it cloudier, obsessing over a problem often makes it worse. But when we give it time, space, and silence, clarity naturally emerges. Imagine a person struggling to untangle a knot. If they pull too hard, they make the knot tighter. But if they slow down, breathe, and gently work with it, the knot loosens with ease. Life's problems work the same way. Instead of forcing things, sometimes the best approach is to trust the process and let things unfold naturally. Watt's teachings on the flow of life also emphasize the importance of playfulness and spontaneity. He once said, "This is the real secret of life." To be completely engaged with what you are doing in the here and now. And instead of calling it work, realize it is play. Many people treat life as a serious, rigid process. They view work as a burden, responsibilities as obligations, and personal growth as a struggle. But Watt reminds us that life is not meant to be suffered through. It is meant to be enjoyed. When we shift our mindset from work to play, from effort to flow, everything changes. Consider a child playing in a park. They do not think about the past or worry about the future. They are fully immersed in the joy of the moment. They do not need a reason to laugh, to run, or to explore. They simply do it because it feels good. Watts encourages us to return to this childlike state of wonder and presence. When we stop taking everything so seriously, when we let go of unnecessary stress, life becomes lighter, freer, and more enjoyable. This philosophy of play radiates to every space in life. Whether it is work, relationships, or personal growth, when we approach things with curiosity rather than pressure, everything flows. We don't force things, they just happen naturally. We trust in the unfolding of life instead of trying to control everything. At the core of Watt's teachings is the simple yet profound truth that life is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced. When we embrace the flow of life, when we stop resisting change, and when we fully immerse ourselves in the present, we begin to experience true freedom, joy, and peace. Life is like a river, constantly moving, constantly changing. The more we relax and allow ourselves to flow with it, the more beautiful and effortless our journey becomes. One of the greatest sources of human suffering is the illusion of control. People go through life believing that if they just plan enough, worry enough, and work hard enough, they can control everything around them. But Alan Watts reminds us that this is a trap of the mind, a false belief that leads to stress, anxiety, and disappointment. In reality, life is unpredictable. No matter how much effort we put into planning, unexpected events will always happen. Yet people constantly resist this truth, trying to force outcomes, manipulate situations, and shape the world according to their expectations. Watt teaches us that this need for control is not only exhausting, but ultimately impossible. True peace comes not from controlling life, but from letting go and trusting the natural flow of existence. One of the most powerful quotes he ever made on the subject comes like this: "The more we struggle for life as pleasure, the more we are actually killing what we love." What Watts is saying here is that the more we try to grasp life too tightly, the more we lose it. Think about how people try to control happiness. They chase it relentlessly. through success, money, relationships, and external achievements. But the harder they try to capture happiness, the more it seems to slip away. That's because happiness is not something to be controlled. It is something to be experienced naturally. Consider a person holding a handful of sand. If they keep their palm open and relaxed, the sand stays in place. But if they squeeze it tightly, trying to hold onto every grain, the sand slips through their fingers. Life works the same way. When we relax, trust, and allow things to unfold, we experience more joy, peace, and fulfillment. But when we try to grasp, control, and force life, we create frustration and suffering. Watts further expands on this idea by saying, to have faith is to trust yourself to the water. When you swim, you don't grab hold of the water, because if you do, you will sink and drown. Instead, you relax and float. This analogy perfectly illustrates the difference between control and surrender. Many people think that if they don't constantly work, plan, and strive, everything will fall apart. But Watts teaches that life is like swimming. The more you fight against the water, the more you sink. But when you trust and let go, you float effortlessly. Think about times when you've been deeply worried about something, maybe an exam, a job interview, or a personal problem. You likely spent hours or even days overthinking, stressing, and trying to find the perfect solution. But did all that worry actually help? Most of the time the answer is no. Often, when we step back, breathe, and trust that things will work out, they do. This does not mean we should do nothing or be careless. Instead, it means we must stop trying to force things that are out of our control. Life has its own rhythm, its own natural course. The more we fight against it, the more exhausted we become. But the moment we let go and trust, things start falling into place effortlessly. Another key insight from Watts on this subject is, you cannot be more sensitive to pleasure without being more sensitive to pain. This statement reveals another illusion of control. Our attempt to avoid discomfort while only chasing pleasure. Many people try to design their lives so that they never experience pain, sadness, or struggle. They believe that if they plan carefully enough, work hard enough, and make the right choices, they can create a life of only happiness and success. But Watts reminds us that you cannot experience joy without also experiencing sadness. Just as light cannot exist without darkness, pleasure cannot exist without pain. When people try to control their lives to avoid suffering, they also limit their ability to experience deep joy and fulfillment. Imagine a person who is so afraid of heartbreak that they never allow themselves to love. They build walls around their heart, avoiding relationships and emotional risks. In doing so, they may protect themselves from pain, but they also deny themselves the experience of deep love and connection. Life is not to be lived like a machine that has been carefully programmed. It is to be experienced, felt, through and through the heights, the depths, the fun and the pain. Instead of living in fear and trying to avoid the expression of negative emotion, Watts calls us to welcome the full range of the human experience. Another quote that further illustrates this concept. Man suffers only because he takes seriously what the gods made for fun. Here, Watts is pointing out that we create much of our own suffering by taking life too seriously. We stress over things that, in the grand scheme of existence, do not truly matter. We become obsessed with success, status, and achievements, believing that our worth depends on them. But Watts encourages us to step back and see life as a cosmic dance. A game to be enjoyed rather than a burden to be carried. Think about how children play. They do not worry about whether they are winning or losing. They do not overanalyze every step they take. They simply enjoy the moment. Watts suggests that we should approach life with the same playfulness. This is not to say that we should not have goals or work hard, but rather we should do so without attachment, without stress, and without the illusion that our happiness depends on the outcome. We can give our best effort while still remaining light-hearted, playful, and open to whatever happens. This philosophy of letting go of control is deeply tied to Watt's teachings on the illusion of the self. He often spoke about how we cling to an identity, a fixed idea of who we are, and how life should be. But this rigid selfishness often leads to unnecessary suffering. He explains this beautifully in the quote, "Trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth." At the heart of Alan Watts' teachings is the idea that our perception of reality is deeply flawed, shaped by illusions, fears, and false beliefs. Most people go through life trapped by a limited view of the world and themselves, believing in ideas that keep them from experiencing life in its fullest, most profound way. Watts encourages us to question everything we think we know, to break free from these mental cages and to discover a deeper, more liberating understanding of reality. One of his most powerful quotes on this subject is, "We seldom realize, for instance, that our most private thoughts are not entirely our own, for our thoughts come out in images and noises which we cannot invent, but which have been given to us by our society." This insight challenges the very foundation of how we see ourselves. Many people believe their thoughts, beliefs, and identities are uniquely their own. But Watts reminds us that most of what we think and feel has been programmed into us by the culture we were born into. The way we see the world, our ideas of success, failure, love, happiness, and even our sense of self, is largely shaped by society. Think about it. Why do we believe that certain jobs are more valuable than others? Why do we measure success in terms of money, status, or achievements? Why do we feel pressured to behave in certain ways, follow certain traditions, or think in certain patterns? From the moment we are born, we are conditioned to see the world through a certain lens. Watts encourages us to step back and question everything. What if our deepest anxieties are not really our own, but simply fears we've inherited from others? What if the goals we are chasing are not actually aligned with our true desires, but are expectations placed upon us by society? By questioning these assumptions, we begin to free ourselves from the illusion of a fixed identity and discover a more authentic way of living. Another profound quote that expands on this idea is, "You are under no obligation to be the same person you were 5 minutes ago." This challenges the idea that we have a fixed, unchanging identity. Many people live their lives according to a script. They believe they must always be consistent with who they were in the past. But Watts reminds us that we are not static beings. We are fluid, ever-changing, and free to redefine ourselves at any moment. Consider how much time people waste trying to maintain a certain image. They stick to beliefs that no longer serve them, stay in careers that drain them, or hold on to relationships that no longer bring them joy, all because they feel obligated to be consistent. But life is not meant to be lived according to a rigid script. The moment we embrace change, we open ourselves up to endless possibilities. Watts also challenges our perception of reality itself. He often spoke about how we see the world through mental filters, shaping reality according to our expectations, rather than experiencing it as it truly is. One of his most famous insights on this subject is, "This is the real secret of life. To be completely engaged with what you are doing in the here and now. And instead of calling it work, realize it is play." Most people experience life as a way of passing time. They go through the series of tasks, obligations, and struggles to their jobs and romantic relationships. They then perceive work as something they have to do, but something they don't get to do. They have to reserve the full expression of joy, realizing one day that they are eventually going to be free to enjoy life. Watts tells us all that life is not a burden to be tolerated, but a dance. a game, or a playful exploration of existence. Imagine a musician playing a song. The goal is not to rush to the end as quickly as possible. The beauty is in the experience of playing, the feeling of the notes, the rhythm of the music. Life is the same way. When we stop treating it as a means to an end and start seeing it as an adventure to be lived fully in each moment, everything changes. Another key teaching of Watts is the illusion of separateness. He often spoke about how humans mistakenly believe they are separate from the universe, when in reality they are deeply connected to everything around them. One of his most famous quotes on this subject is, "You are the universe experiencing itself." This idea is deeply rooted in Eastern philosophy, particularly in traditions like Zen Buddhism and Taoism. Watts explains that we are not separate, isolated individuals living in a universe that is separate from us. We are the universe. Think about it. Everything that makes up your body, your thoughts, and your consciousness is connected to the larger fabric of existence. The atoms in your body once belonged to stars. The air you breathe was once part of countless other living beings. The energy that moves through you is the same energy that moves through the entire cosmos. Yet most people live as if they are alone, trapped in their own heads, consumed by their own worries, believing that they are just tiny, insignificant creatures in a vast and indifferent universe. But Watts reminds us that this is an illusion. We are not in the universe. When we fully grasp this truth, everything changes. The boundaries between self and other dissolve. Fear begins to fade. We stop seeing life as a battle against external forces and start experiencing it as a harmonious flow. Another profound insight from Watts on this subject is, trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth. People spend so much time trying to figure out who they are. They seek labels, roles, and identities to make sense of themselves. But Watts reminds us that the self is not something that can be captured or pinned down. The more we try to define ourselves, the more we limit ourselves. Imagine if a river tried to define itself as only a body of water moving in a straight line. It would miss out on the reality that it is constantly shifting, expanding and merging with other waters. In the same way, when we cling too tightly to labels like, "I am this," or "I am that," we box ourselves into a limited version of who we could be. Watts encourages us to stop trying to define ourselves and instead experience life directly. Instead of asking, "Who am I?" ask, "What am I experiencing right now?" Instead of trying to build an identity, allow yourself to simply be. In the grand scheme of things, life is a mystery that cannot be solved, only experienced. When we let go of the need to control, define, and understand everything, we free ourselves to fully engage with the magic of existence. At the core of all of Watts' teachings on self-discovery is the idea that life is not something that happens to us. It is something we are a part of, something we create and experience from moment to moment. By breaking free from illusions, questioning our assumptions, and embracing the interconnectedness of all things, we open the door to a life of deeper wisdom, freedom, and joy. One of the most powerful ideas Alan Watts shares is the importance of embracing the flow of life. Many people live with constant resistance, trying to control every aspect of their lives. They want to predict the future, force outcomes, and eliminate uncertainty. But Watts teaches that this resistance creates suffering because life is not meant to be controlled. A powerful quote that captures this idea is, "Muddy water is best cleared by leaving it alone." This quote illustrates one of the biggest lessons in life. Sometimes, the best thing you can do is let things be. When we constantly stir the waters of our minds with overthinking, worry, and unnecessary control, we create chaos. But if we simply step back, things naturally settle and become clear. Think about the moments in life when you felt most at peace. They weren't the moments when you were trying to control everything. Instead, they were the moments when you were fully present, allowing life to unfold naturally. Perhaps it was a deep conversation, a walk in nature, or a time when you let go of expectations and simply enjoyed the moment. Yet, many people struggle with this. Society conditions us to believe that we must constantly plan, push, and strive to be successful and happy. But Watts reminds us that forcing life never works. The harder we try to control outcomes, the more stress and frustration we create. He often used the analogy of water to explain this concept. Water is powerful because it doesn't resist. It flows. It moves effortlessly around obstacles, adapts to changes, and never fights against its nature. Watts encourages us to live like water, embracing change rather than fearing it. Another powerful insight from Watts is, you are a function of what the whole universe is doing, in the same way that a wave is a function of what the whole ocean is doing. This statement challenges the belief that we are separate from life. Many people live as if they are isolated individuals, trying to navigate a world that is outside of them. But Watts reminds us that we are not separate from life. We are life. Just as a wave is not separate from the ocean, we are not separate from the universe. Everything we do, think, and feel is part of the greater flow of existence. The problems arise when we resist this flow, believing that we must control, manipulate, or fight against it. This realization is incredibly freeing. It means that we don't have to struggle so hard. We don't have to figure out every detail of life, because life already knows what it's doing. When we trust in the natural intelligence of existence, things begin to unfold in beautiful, unexpected ways. One of the biggest traps people fall into is chasing happiness. Society teaches us that happiness is something we must earn through success, money, or external achievements. But Watts exposes the flaw in this thinking. Happiness is not something you postpone for the future, it is something you design for the present. Think about it. Have you ever reached a goal only to immediately set another? That's because when happiness is attached to external things, it is never permanent. As soon as one desire is fulfilled, a new one arises, creating an endless cycle of dissatisfaction. The key is to stop postponing happiness and start living fully in the present. Instead of constantly striving for a future moment, Watts encourages us to find joy in what is happening right now. This is deeply connected to another concept Watts often spoke about, the illusion of time. He explained that most people live trapped in the past and future, rarely experiencing the present moment fully. He describes this beautifully. No valid plans for the future can be made by those who have no capacity for living now. This quote reveals a paradox. Many people spend their lives planning for the future, but if they don't know how to live in the present, their future will only be filled with the same dissatisfaction they feel now. If you are constantly waiting for happiness, it will always remain just out of reach. Watts encourages us to shift our perspective. Instead of thinking of life as a journey with a final destination, we should see it as a dance. The purpose of a dance is not to reach a certain point on the floor. It is to enjoy every step, every movement, every moment. Another key idea from Watts is the freedom that comes from letting go of ego. He often spoke about how the ego, the part of us that constantly seeks validation, control, and security, is the greatest obstacle to true freedom. He puts it simply, man suffers only because he takes seriously what the gods made for fun. People suffer because they take life too seriously. They get caught up in their identities, their problems, their worries, forgetting that life is, at its core, a playful, ever-changing experience. Watts encourages us to laugh at ourselves, to stop holding on so tightly, and to approach life with a sense of lightness and humor. This is not to say that life is meaningless or that we should avoid responsibility. Rather, it means that we should not burden ourselves with unnecessary suffering. When we loosen our grip on life, we become more open, more creative, and more free. One final insight from Watts that ties everything together is, the meaning of life is just to be alive. It is so plain and so obvious and so simple. And yet, everybody rushes around in a great panic, as if it were necessary to achieve something beyond themselves. This is perhaps the most profound lesson of all. There is nothing you need to achieve to be worthy. You do not need to prove yourself, to be someone special, or to accomplish great things to justify your existence. Simply being alive is enough. You are enough. When we stop trying to force meaning onto life and instead allow ourselves to experience it fully, we find a deep sense of peace. Instead of constantly striving, we can relax into the rhythm of life, trusting that everything is unfolding exactly as it should. By embracing this mindset, we free ourselves from the endless chase for external validation. We stop living for the approval of others, and we start living authentically. We become more present, more joyful, and more in tune with the beauty of existence.